Hey. In this video, we're going to be talking about server-side tagging for Google Tag Manager. It's a brand new suite of features for GTM, and it basically all revolves around the server container running in the Google Cloud Platform App Engine server instance. In this video, we're particularly interested in how to set everything up, because server-side tagging can seem like a quite daunting concept. So in this video, I'll show you how easy it's actually to automatically provision one of those App Engine servers, and how cheap it will be because you'll be able to use the generous free tier of App Engine. And in case you have a lot of traffic and a lot of hits processed through a server container, you still have around 300 USD of credit if you're a new cloud platform user. But even without the credit, the cost should be quite low until you choose to upgrade to a production-ready instance, and we'll talk about that cost here as well. I hope you enjoy the video, and make sure to read the accompanying articles that I've listed in the notes for this video. Enjoy. So we're going to start with creating a new server container. So in GTM, browse to an account that you have admin access to, so that you have the permissions to create new containers. And start the new container creation flow, and you should see the new server container type here for server-side instrumentation and measurement, and it's definitely in beta. And then give the container a name, whatever works for you, and then just click create. So now it's created a new container for you, and the next thing you have to do is provision the container to create a new tagging server. And tagging server in this scenario means a Google Cloud App Engine standard instance, one single standard instance. So a very, very basic setup that would not do in a production environment, but it's a great way to get started with server-side. And you can always upgrade it to a flexible App Engine setup with multiple instances for redundancy and for scale. But when you click automatically provision tagging server, it will start the flow, and it will, very first thing it will tell you is that it will create a new server on Google Cloud Platform, but you need to either select or create a billing account. So this means that you basically have to give your credit card details to Google Cloud, and this is just because the way that tagging server can scale up, it can incur costs. It usually won't incur any costs if you're using the standard App Engine instance implementation. And you also get a credit of $300 if you have a new Google Cloud Platform towards your cloud charges. But still, it is a billing or a charge incurring setup in Google Cloud. So that's why you need to create a billing account for it. So when you click create a billing account, it steps you into the billing account flow, and this is where you would configure your credit card and whatever else you need. Once you've created the billing account, it will take you back to Google Tag Manager, and it will then have you select your newly created billing account from the list of billing accounts. Then when I click select billing account, it will start provisioning the server, and this will take a while. And once you're done, it will tell you that the server was created. It will give you some information, and importantly, will tell you what your Google Cloud Platform project ID is. It will also tell you what the URL of your tagging server is. So technically, this is your tagging server endpoint. You can try visiting it. It won't do you much good though. But you'll also you'll see that there's a 500 HTTP error here. So that just means that it's not, you can't visit it directly. But you'll want to check out the Google Cloud Platform project ID just to get an idea of how the Google Cloud Platform works. So you'll see things like App Engine usage rates here. You'll see any errors are reported here as well. And you'll be able to follow your billing and how much money this is basically taking up. But as I said, you can see up here that the free trial is pretty generous. So 267 euros in credit for a single App Engine standard instance will take you a long way if you just want to test out server-side tagging. You probably won't be incurring any costs at all, depending on how much traffic you're sending through the server-side container. So technically you now have a URL, so we can do a couple of things. We can actually try creating a universal analytics setup. So we're going to go into clients, and you can see that there's already a universal analytics client set up for you. So a client is a piece of software running in the server container that digests incoming requests that have the measurement protocol schema. So typically you would send those requests directly to Google Analytics, but in this case you're sending them to your server container, and the client is the thing that actually gobbles them up and produces triggers for your tags in the server container. So we don't have to do anything in clients. We already have a universal analytics client. You can open it up, but there's not much to do here. But then what you want to do is in tags, you'll want to create a new tag. Let's call it Universal Analytics. The tag type would be Universal Analytics. As you can see, there's not much to go on right now at the time of recording. And you don't have to enable any overriding settings. You can, if you don't check this, it means that it will just use everything that was in the incoming measurement protocol head. You can update things, like if you want to send it to a different tracking ID, you can put it here. Or if you want to add individual fields, like let's say you want to send anonymized IP, you would add it here, for example. But we're not going to do any of that. We're just going to have this a complete pass-through tag. And then as the trigger, we're just going to have this be a universal analytics trigger. So this means that we're going to allow all the events that are passed by clients, as long as the client name, so you choose a built-in variable client name, as long as client name equals universal analytics. So this trigger will fire whenever the universal analytics client created a trigger event for the container. So that's good to go. We can take this container to preview mode right now. So you can see the preview mode. It takes a while to load, so let's give it a moment. While it's loading, we can generate, oops, it gave me a server error. So here we are in preview mode. You can see that it's pretty similar to what you get in regular GTM, except it's of course in its own tab. And some of these categories are different, obviously. We can actually test this right now. We can go to the measurement protocol hit builder. And we can just generate a regular. You'll need to authorize against it first. And then we can just generate any type of hit. Let's do a page view hit to UA 12345-1 with a client ID of 1.2.3.4. And we can validate that hit and make sure that it's okay. Obviously it requires a location as well, so let's put just a URL here like this. And let's actually just send it to an actual valid endpoint. And just to make sure that we can find it, let's give it a random name. So this is just generating a measurement protocol request. So what we're going to do is we're going to be taking a copy shareable link to hit. We're going to add that to a new tab. So here you can see we have the payload over here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to copy the URL of this container. So what the endpoint actually responds to. You can get it by clicking the container ID. And then we're just going to replace like this and then add collect here. So doing this, we're sending the measurement protocol hit to our own server-side endpoint with the collect path, which is the path where you would send your measurement protocol hits to. And it's not going to tell you anything that happened, but over here in preview mode, you can now see that there was a measurement protocol request intercepted, claimed by the Universal Analytics client, which generated a page view hit or a page view event into the server-side container, which fired a Universal Analytics tag. And here in Google Analytics, we can see that there's a hit on test page, which we just sent through measurement protocol. So we've verified that this setup works just fine. So this is how you set up a server-side container, provision an App Engine standard instance for it, and start collecting data. Now, in your regular web container, if you wanted to easily start sending hits to your server-side endpoint, I'll show you how to do that. So in your web container, if you go to tags, you can take any one of your regular tags and just copy it, give it some way to differentiate, so server-side. And then when you scroll down all the way to advanced configuration, you'll find a new field, transport URL. And this is where you would add the endpoint for your server-side container. So by adding this right here, it's the base URL where it will be sending those collect hits to instead of the Google Analytics endpoint. So when I now save this tag, I'll need to actually remove the trailing slash like that. I can save this tag, go to preview mode, and then visit the site where the container is active. And now in preview mode, you can see that there's all these events coming in. When I reload, you can see that they're coming in. So by adding the transport URL field, you're actually telling Google Analytics that instead of sending the hit to Google Analytics, send it to my server container endpoint. And this is how you would do that. All right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to up the ante a little bit, and we're going to start provisioning actual production-ready App Engine standard servers. At this point, we're going to jump a little bit into the future, and this is post-processing of this video. And I'm going to jump in and do a bit of things a bit differently than were in the original video. In the original video, the process of provisioning those extra servers was done with the gcloud command line tools that you install locally on your own computer. And while this is a perfectly fine way to do it, there's a much easier way to do this without having to install anything else or without having to use your own computer resources for provisioning those servers. So what we're going to do is we're going to upgrade to an App Engine flexible server, and we're going to provision a couple of extra instances to support the production workload. So what you have to do first is go into the Google Cloud Console and make sure that your project is selected. So you can find it probably under the project selector under the All tab. And here we go. Here's my server-side project. At this point, you can click this icon in the top bar. It's the Cloud Shell icon. And when you click that, the Google Cloud Console will provision a Google Cloud Shell for you. And at this point, you need to make sure that you're in the right project. So if you're looking at the thing in the yellow parentheses, typically this will default to the project where the Cloud Shell was first activated in. But I've been using Cloud Shell for a number of different things. So what I have to do now is make sure that I set the correct project for myself. So you can get the project ID from the project selector. Once you have that, you run the command gcloud config set project, and then the project ID. And now the project should be updated. You should see it in the yellow parentheses. At this point, you need to copy the bash command from the server-side tagging documentation. The bash command is a shell script that will provision those servers for you. So go ahead and fetch that command from the documentation now. And this is what the command looks like. So once you press enter, it will start by asking you a couple of questions, and then it's ready to provision those extra instances for you. So most of the time you can just press enter to take the default value. So the container config, yeah, that's fine. Policy URL. Deployment type is one where you want to type production, because this is now going to be a production ready deployment. Everything else, minimum number of servers is 3. It can scale up to 6, so that's fine. And then when you're ready, it will tell you that you are now upgrading to a production deployment, and this will start incurring charges. App Engine Flexible costs you around $40 per month per instance by default. Of course, if you have more traffic coming in and the network egress and the App Engine itself is being utilized more than expected, it will lead to a bit more cost, which just as a side note makes it very important to manage a robust billing budget, which you can set up through the billing options. So you can set up budgets and alerts in case your credit card is gonna be hit with a huge bill due to some unforeseen circumstances. So anyway, when you're ready to start provisioning, just press Y here and then enter, and now it's going to take quite a bit of time, maybe 5 to 10 minutes to run the script, so you can do something else while waiting. Once you see the text, your server deployment is complete, it literally means that your server deployment is complete. And at this point, we'll merge back to the original video, because this is the point where things continue after you've provisioned those servers. And a short while later, we're actually done. So our server has now been upgraded to a full App Engine Flexible setup with 3 instances, all running and all scaling together with your setup. So in the Google Cloud console, you can always check out what your current setup is looking like. So this is actually pretty cool, and you're ready to start doing other stuff. So the last thing I want to do here is show you, because one of the problems with this setup is that you're using this awkward domain name, and not only is it hard to remember, it also forces your setup to basically use a third-party endpoint, and you might actually want to have your server container running in first-party relationship with your domain. So have it point to a subdomain of whatever your site's main domain is. And you can even configure App Engine to support multiple different domain names. If you have multiple different top privately controlled domains, all communicating with server-side tagging, you might actually want to register multiple different subdomains to make sure that all the HTTP communications happen in first-party context. There are many reasons for this, but one big one is that you can actually set and read cookies in first-party context. If you didn't do this, then cookies would only be transmitted if the browser supported third-party cookies, which is becoming more and more rare these days. So what you have to do is you have to go to your Google Cloud project, and in the App Engine section of that project, you go to Settings. And in Settings, you have this option for custom domains, and this is where you would add a custom domain. But if you don't have the domain that you need verified, you might actually want to verify the subdomain itself and not just the top privately controlled domain. So I want to do collector.cmohammed.com and then click verify. So it's going to throw you over to the Webmaster Central, and this is where you're going to have to it's going to tell you how to verify the domain. If you find your registrar on this list, feel free to choose it, but the easiest way to go about it is just to choose Other, and it's going to basically tell you to introduce a TXT record into the DNS configuration for this particular domain. So this will largely depend on how your DNS is managed. If you don't manage it yourself, you would have to tell whoever does it. You would have to give these instructions to them. And it's a very simple thing. They have to create a new TXT record for the DNS that has this content. But I'll show you how to do this in Cloudflare because that's where I'm managing my own DNS. So I copy this content, and in Cloudflare DNS I would add a new record. Type is TXT. Name, this is where you would add the host for your or your subdomain name. Time to live, it can be whatever you want, but maybe choose a short one just for this case. And then you add this into the content part and then click save. So now that you've added the TXT record, it's going to take a while, hopefully just the 2 minutes, but you can go to Webmaster Central and click verify. And as soon as the TXT record is activated, it will actually verify it. And here we go, we have now verified collector.simohava.com. And you can just leave the record there. As you can see, I've got all my TXTs here. It's a good idea to just leave it there in case you might need to re-verify at some point. Once you've verified the domain, you go back to the Google Cloud console and hit refresh domains. And it should tell you that you now have this subdomain verified. You can remove the www prefix and just use the collector, because this is where it's going to, Google Cloud will actually add an automatic SSL certificate to this domain. So it's going to secure the traffic from the domain name to Google Cloud servers. So we're just going to save those mappings. And now it's going to start provisioning the SSL certificate. And while we wait for it to do that, we need to add some new DNS records. So this is where you're actually pointing the collector simohava.com domain name to your Google Cloud App Engine server. So you have to take all these 8 records, 4 A records and 4 AAAA records, and you have to add them to your DNS. So that's what I'm going to do right now. And so once the DNS, you've added the details, you'll just have to wait. And then before you go on, you'll also need to make a little change in your server container. So after you've changed your server, you actually need to change the tagging server URL to whatever you originally had to make sure that preview and debug still works as it should. So at this point, if your DNS has propagated, by clicking preview, it should actually open the preview mode in your new collector or in your new subdomain that you just registered. So this means that your subdomain is now responding to requests. And you can take your measurement protocol hit that you tested earlier and just change it to point to your new endpoint like this. And now in debug mode, you should see your page view hit coming with the test data that you sent originally. So this means that your setup now works. And let's just recap what we've done. We created a new server container, which created a new billing account and a Google Cloud project with an App Engine standard installation. We tested that using the default URL provided by App Engine, but then we also upgraded to a production-ready 3-server App Engine flexible setup. And finally, we mapped a custom domain name to our server-side tagging endpoint. So this is how you build a server-side tagging proxy. And with 3 servers running on App Engine, assuming you have a moderate hit load, so we're not talking about millions and millions a day, you should be able to get by with around $100 a month. But if you're collecting a lot of data and passing a lot of information through a server container, it will scale up accordingly. But 3 servers running on App Engine standard is more than enough for the vast majority of websites out there with only moderate traffic, so the long tail of the web. But as soon as you start introducing more traffic, you'll incur more cost as well, and you might want to provision some more servers just to make sure that the latency is non-existent. So that's it for this tutorial. I hope it's been helpful. I know that it's a big technical obstacle for many, and it's a big paradigm shift for how GTM works. But the automatic provisioning process is super fluid, it's intuitive, and it's very easy to use. So at the very least, you'll be able to get running with an App Engine standard set up in no time without having to type any awkward command line code. And for everything else, the documentation and blog posts and articles that are coming up will surely help. Thanks for watching.